Science fiction and horror are two genres that have garnered quite the following among audiences. Combine them together and add a pinch of Japanese cinematic art to it, and you have the makings of many a masterpiece. In this video, we will look at 20 such movies, explore their storylines, and see why they service the sci-fi horror genre so darn well. In this video, we will look at 19 such movies. And no, we won't be talking about Godzilla, but we'll look at other pieces, like Parasite E, Hell Driver, or even 964 Pinocchio. But before we dive into that, let's take a moment to ask you to subscribe for more nerd content, such as videos on DC Comics or the latest Doctor Who theories. With that out of the way, let us set the horror creeping with... Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. 964 Pinocchio. We should start with a trigger warning disclaimer for body horror, sexual slavery, and more in this story of a sex slave cyborg whose memory has been wiped by his owners because he couldn't, keep it up. While being homeless, he meets Himiko, who is also memory wiped, but unlike Pinocchio, the sex slave, Himiko can speak. She's pretty cool at first because she uses her time to make maps of the city to help other memory wiped peeps. Atta girl. After spending time together, the two amnesiacs kiss, which triggers a metamorphosis of body horror that reveals just how intensely Pinocchio's body was modified by his owners. While posting this, Himiko pretends to help Pinocchio, but she eventually betrays him. But he escapes and starts causing terror. Himiko's attempts to team up with Pinocchio's developers to subdue him fail, with him tearing off her cybernetic head and eventually melding with it, thus ending the story. What makes this work sci-fi wise is evident, what with the cyborg characters and the setting that utilizes technology. This low-budget guerrilla technique movie, which utilized real people, overpaid actors, is horror simply because of the sociological implications of the story. The genre is intensified thanks to the body horror that is the metamorphosis where both principal characters release vomit, blood, and pus in large amounts. Whew, that was a lot, but the list is just starting. Next up we have Genocide. World War II and the subsequent advancements in war science have changed Japanese cinema, yes, but also have had a pretty huge impact on the world itself, and Genocide builds up on the moral implications of that change. This is made even clearer with the opening shot of the film, that of an atomic blast. After this scene, we're taken to a fictional island where a researcher, Joji, is supposed to be studying rare insects, but is instead with a blonde woman cheating on his wife. Bombastic side-eye, anyone? Things get worse when the insects that Joji was supposed to be studying lead to an American bomber plane crashing on the island. Later, its pilots are eaten by said insects. This eventually leads to the discovery that the blonde woman is a spy for the Russians who are planning to use biological warfare via insects to take over the world. In the end, Joji redeems himself by sacrificing his life to save others. Post this, the team tries to stop the USA from bombing the island. The Americans want to do so to remove the threat of the insects, but Japan has civilians on the island and wants to find a better solution. The movie ends on this note, with impending doom hanging over the island. While the horror is more existential and nuclear in this piece, bringing to mind Godzilla and the metaphor for the nuke, the science fiction elements are clear, with ideas such as biological warfare and intelligent insects. But these were movies of their time. In the 2010s, the threats we face have changed, and the question we pose to you is this: does our fiction, especially our movies, accurately capture this? Let's see the next entry in our list and find out. Cube. This is a movie which screams psychological horror for the characters trapped inside it. It will bring to mind Maze Runner, in that the characters here too are trapped in an enormous structure without memory of how they got there. In Cube, the structure is a cube, with booby-trapped rooms where a group is trying to escape and find the exit. Not only this, but the rooms themselves move, leading to the group's intelligence falling short. Add to this internal conflict between two of the members, leading to a trigger warning and murder, and we have a recipe for a movie that can keep you on the edge of your seat. And it gets better. When Goto, one of the group members, sacrifices his chance at escape to ensure Kai does, the audience learns that Kai is the one running the experiment and watching the survivors. Talk about not being able to trust anyone in this Japanese remake of a Canadian film by the same name. While what makes this horror is clear, the sci-fi elements are not vague either. The pristine walls and rooms all evoke a sterile feeling for one. And that ending, Boy, it screams sci-fi. While you let us know whether this movie manages to capture the existential dread of facing climate change and wars and other such global calamities out of our control, we will introduce you to yet another movie. Half human. Can a creature be both brutal and merciful? A friend and foe? And what makes someone human? All these questions are pulled up in Half Human, which follows a group of friends who went on a skiing expedition. When two of their group are killed and one goes missing, the rest reluctantly return to Tokyo, vowing to come back to find out what happened after the blizzard is over and the snow has thawed. When they return, they're on an expedition looking for the Snowman, a bipedal creature. Following them is an animal broker. When the snowman is sighted, Takashi follows him, only to end up at the animal broker's tent, who beats him up. A local from a village that shuns outsiders saves him, but is punished for it, and Takashi is tied to a cliff and left to the vultures. The villagers, due to their isolation, have become disfigured and started to worship the snowman as a deity. Yes, the same snowman that murdered two people and yet also took the time to save Takashi when it found him tied to the cliff. Things take a turn for the ugly when Chika, the local girl, mistakes the animal broker's gang for Takashi's group and leads them to the creature, which results in the death of its young. In retaliation, the snowman destroys the village and captures one of the members of Takashi's expedition to throw into a pot of sulfur when Chika intervenes and saves them. Yet, she has to sacrifice herself in the process. The horror element of this is visibly clear, but what makes this piece science fiction? Well, some would say that the idea of isolated people turning different and worshipping a far stronger deity is very Lovecraftian in nature, making it weird fiction more than sci-fi. What do you think? While you let us know that in the comments section, we shall interest you in another movie titled Terror Beneath the Sea. A collaboration between Japan and the USA, this film follows the story of two reporters who, after the wake of a nuclear activity, find a mystery humanoid swimming. This leads them to the underwater Illuminati, led by the enigmatic Professor Moore, who has created the human fish people as a mindless army for his plans of world domination. The horror in this film comes from the details of the process of turning people into these mindless cyborgs, and their fish suit insight comedy, which levels the atmosphere a little. And of course, the science fiction bit needs no explanation. A mad scientist, a cyborg, global war, and nuclear testing all come together to firmly put this story in the sci-fi realm. Next up, we have Moonchild. This is a 2003 movie that tries to imagine 2014. In this version of events, Japan has faced economic collapse and people are forced to move to China. This is at heart a tale of friendship in dire circumstances and how even those who aren't the best of humanity, such as gang leaders and thieves, can have beautiful bonds. This is the story of the friendship between Sho and Kei. Kei is a vampire who meets Sho when he is a child thief and saves his life. Years later, the two are still stealing together when Son meets them, alongside his sister. Despite her loving Kei, who had then left, the sister marries Sho and has a daughter, Hana, when Son, who has now joined a rival gang, return. Kei is also sentenced to death at a local prison, and Sho visits him, both glad the other is alive. In the final showdown, when Son kills Sho, Kei kills Son and fulfills his promise of looking after Hana. In a twist ending, it is revealed, after Hana heads off to college, that Sho had been turned by Kei and was still alive, just unable to face being a vampire. Trigger warning, the two face the sun and end their lives finally at peace. The final scene is of them with all their friends at the beach in either afterlife or another life. While a beautiful story, what makes Moonchild science fiction or horror? After all, gangs are more crime movies, and vampires can be found in supernatural work. Well, to begin with, you're right about the last part. The movie is science fantasy, since it's set in the future in a world where the rules of our natural order apply, but there are magical elements like vampires. According to IMDb, the gothic elements are what make this action-packed movie more horror. Up next we have Helldriver. The movie starts with two sisters, Rika and Yasushi, who have become cannibals and are on the trail of Kika, Rika's daughter. A meteorite strikes Rika, who has just replaced her heart with Kika's, and the two are encased in a cocoon as a zombie outbreak happens. This divides Japan in two, the north side, which is infested, and the south, where humans live behind a wall, Attack of Titan style. 1 year passes, and Kika is released from her cocoon with a mechanical heart, and decides to hunt zombies, while human politicians politicians debate over whether that's ethical until the opposing side is killed by zombies and changes his stance in his dying moments. Kika and her team identify Rika as the source of the zombies and go to defeat her with some side quests on the way. Rika is found as part of a giant body made of zombies, which the humans fire missiles at, but that backfires as the giant uses that as a way to fly south towards the wall until Kika intervenes. She climbs up the giants and fights her way to her mother, removes her heart, and, trigger warning, chops off her head, making all the zombies go flop. She then proceeds to crush the useless heart, and we think all has ended on a good note, except that Rika's head is blown onto another planet, which could start a whole new zombie infestation there, inducing horror and excitement in the audience. But that's not all that makes this work a terror. After all, the body horror elements in the work are evident. And so is the science fiction bit, as not only does the work set up a possible sequel in space, but also has a significant amount of reliance on tech and modern weapons. Next up we have Memories. Well, this one is different, as this is a science fiction anthology series, so we'll look at some of the stories covered in the show, shall we? Starting with The Magnetic Rose, where a spaceship finds a spaceship graveyard giving out a distress signal. Honestly, guys, this story could have been an episode of Doctor Who. See, what has happened is that a famous singer, trigger warning, killed her fiancé for refusing to marry her, and not an AI hologram of her does the same to anyone they encounter. But the crew aboard the Corona, the spaceship that has caught this distress signal, does not know that, and work to try and figure out who needs help, and later how they can escape. But while some of them make it out, others do not, and the structure of the ship ends up part of the graveyard in a rose-like structure. To know what exactly led to these outcomes, do watch the episode and let us know what you think of it, while we tell you about the third story in the series called Cannon Fodder, which catalogs the life of a boy in a city where everything depends on firing a cannon to a presumed enemy outside the city, which no one knows anything about. While the boy starts out questioning this, eventually his dreams too become part of this social status, inciting dread in the viewers. Yes, you got it right, fans. The horror elements are more sociological and psychological in Cannon Fodder as opposed to the action of Magnetic Rose. And while Magnetic Rose's sci-fi elements are clearly visible, one needs only look at the reliance on tech to see the same in Cannon Fodder. And our next work is Parasite E. Have you ever heard of the mitochondria? Yes, the powerhouse of the cell. Well, one scientist decided to study the idea of the mitochondrial E. When his wife died, he decided to donate her kidneys to a young girl on the condition that she gets his wife's liver. After a series of experiments, this liver interacts with a substance from a bottle named Eve, turns into his wife, makes sweet love to him, and disappears. But she also has taken over the scientist, Nagashimi's assistant Sachiko. Later it's revealed that the wife was hearing voices to take an interest in her husband's work, and the mitochondrial Eve was manipulating her life to result in its birth so that it could take over humanity. The young girl who got her kidneys is also part of the plan, and the scientist rushes to save the little girl at the expense of his own life. Both sci-fi and horror elements are both clear in this film, what with the setting screaming science and the events showing how horrific unregulated experimentation could be. Next up we have Tokyo Gore Police. A movie built for body horror fans, the story follows Ruka, an engineer hunter. Why do people need to hunt engineers? Because an antagonist, named Key Name, infected humans with a virus which leads to them sprouting biochemical weapons when hurt. They're also said to be monstrous. Engineer hunters are the answer to the problem by Tokyo Police, and our protagonist Ruka is one of the best. But she also has a personal agenda: find the man who murdered her father in broad daylight and bring him to justice. Turns out that man is Keyman himself, but he isn't the true antagonist, for his father too was an officer who was suspended, and thus had to murder Ruka's father to prevent poverty. Ruka realizes that police brutality and the head commissioner are the true evil, and has a sword fight with the man who orchestrated the assassination of her father, but who had raised her as the perfect weapon in remorse. What happens to Keyman? And does Ruka survive her fight? To know that, you have to watch the piece now, don't you? Now, come back and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Before we move on to the next work, let's just check whether this movie truly belongs on this list. Yes, the science fiction and horror elements are clearly evident in this film, as the body horror emerges from the same place the science fiction does, the biochemical weapons. First Genocide, and now Parasite E. Should we do a video on why Japan's cinema is obsessed with biochemical weapons? Nah, too off-brand. Unlike the next entry on our list. Next up, we have Mutant Girls Squad. This story will bring the X-Men to mind because this film features mutants as well. Rin is a descendant of an ancient clan which have superpowers due to mutations and are hunted for the same. She works with a group to learn to control her power. This includes Rei, who hates humans as they killed the boy who loved her, Yoshi, who has tentacles, and Kusargi, who is a vampire. While the latter is also trans, that plays no role in the story, and we don't think the aim of the story is to promote transphobia by making their antagonist trans, so we'll avoid that can of worms. Anyway, Kusargi brainwashes the group to kill innocent humans as well, until Rin convinces Yoshi that is wrong and the innocents should be protected instead. I mean, sure, they can kill the anti-mutant politicians who are hunting them, but what did humans ever do to them? Except Rei, but that's also shown to be balanced with the idea that some humans also love them. What happens at the end? Well, there's a fight with both the Prime Minister and Kusargi, but to know how it ends, you must watch Mutant Girls Squad. The horror elements in the movie lie in the supernatural, of course, and the tragic storylines as well, while the sci-fi part is the mutations, putting this movie firmly in the sci-fi horror category, just like the next entry on our list. Matango. If you're stuck on an island with a group that eats mushrooms that turn them into delusional monsters, what will you do? And will you be happier there, or when you're rescued as the sole survivor, despite only 2 members of the rather large group dying? Maria, quarantined in a mental hospital, faces these questions as he recalls his stint with a group on a deserted island with mushrooms that turn those who eat them into mushroom-human hybrids. How did he escape, and what happened to his group is something that you will know when you watch the film. And yes, unlike the horror aspect, Matango is not very inclined towards hard science fiction, but apparently weird fiction falls in the sci-fi category now, and Matango is definitely a perfect example of that. Let us know what you think of that in the comments, while we sip some water and then introduce you to our next entry.
These things are gonna follow me. When they do, I want you to get out of here.
The Green Slime. Have you watched Alien? Well, this is a similar movie where a group of scientists go to study an asteroid and return to their ship with an alien slime creature who procreates from its own blood and can feed on radiation. Since this is a horror movie, of course the creature is hostile, as it electrocutes those on the ship and eventually takes over, until one of the pilots blows up the station in Earth's atmosphere. And all this after they have just stopped an extinction event. One of the notable characters here is Elliot, who returns to the slime-infested ship to help his teammate and friend. Further, the fast-paced action and high stakes alongside the multiple gruesome character ends makes it a shoo-in for both the thriller and horror genres. Up next we have Goku, Body Snatcher from Hell. Imagine being caught in a hijack situation, which then turns into a plane crash, which then turns into the invasion of a body-snatching alien race, hell-bent on wiping out humanity. That's the story of Goku, Body Snatcher from Hell, which ends on the ominous note of more aliens arriving as the last survivors try to make sense of the new world they find themselves in. Aliens and body horror are the 2 selling points of this film. For some reason, it reminds us of kaiju films, where characters have to face an unbeatable monster that's usually a metaphor for an existential horror like climate change or, trigger warning, the nuclear bomb. Perhaps because this movie too starts with a bomb and then turns into a co-ed Lord of the Flies with aliens. What do you think? Does this seem like an interesting watch? With resourceful characters, desperation, and aliens, we would say yes. While you ponder over that, we're going to sip our waters and introduce you to Meatball Machine. This is a love story which turns the lovers into enemies, but it ain't the rom-com you're thinking of. See, a lone factory worker, Yoji, has the feels for a co-worker, but is unable to express the same. Then, just for some added transphobia because the movie is a product of its time, Yoji is, trigger warning, assaulted by a cross-dresser, and finds and takes home an alien bug. When he gets beaten up trying to save his crush from the same fate, she takes a shine to him and goes home with him. Yes, we know, according to the Lannisters from Game of Thrones, this is unreal, but Meatball Machine is fiction, and reality can be even weirder, so let's not debate that here, but in the comments. Essentially, the true plot of the film begins when the alien Necroborg infects the lovers and turns them into biochemical weapons to fight other Necroborgs, leading to the final showdown between the lovers turned enemies. And if you love family feels, there's a dad out to get Necroborgs for infecting his daughter. And yes, we mean he means to take revenge, not find an alien to infect her. Before we move on to the next entry, let's check what makes this movie a part of this video. So, aliens are the sci-fi element here, and the horror lies in the turning process, as well as the idea of free will being squashed like an alien bug. Interesting, we say, as our writers push their specs up their noses a bit. What do you think, fans? Is Meatball Machine worth watching, or has it aged badly? While you let us know, we shall present to you The Host. Not the Stephenie Meyer book. No, this is a different IP altogether. The Host is inspired by an American corporation unethically dumping toxins in the Han River due to their mismanaged disposal system. In the movie, this becomes the inciting incident as this creates a creature. 6 years later, a settlement near the river is attacked by said creature, and the survivors are quarantined by the American military as they think the creature is the host of a new and deadly virus. The story then follows the attempt of a father to rescue his daughter from the creature, and how in this process he learns there is no virus and gets the government after him to try to silence him. They wouldn't want him revealing that the virus story was made up to distract the people from the creature's origins now, would they? The last act of the story sees a crowd protesting the government's plan to dumping more toxins into the river to kill the creature, while his father, trigger warning, enraged at the death of his daughter at the hands of the creatures, finishes it off. Years later, he has adopted one of the survivors of the creature's attack and ignores a broadcast spouting propaganda about the whole incident as more creatures are hinted at by the film. A fictional story with real struggles, eh? After all, toxin dumps and water pollution are harming many communities. But this is not the place to talk about that, so please allow us to entertain you with yet another movie, where the horror isn't societal and the science fiction part isn't too close to reality. As the Gods Will. Think of what will happen if the Squid Games met the Hunger Games. You will get As the Gods Will. A group of Japanese students are forced to go through several deadly trials, with the last one being a game of luck for entertainment and to see who God's true children are. The god here, however, is a vagrant observer of the game or a random person, making the trials and loss even worse. While one of the two surviving students celebrates his victory, the other renounces this god. This character is Shun, who has proven to be quick and resourceful. He also cares for the people he loves, as demonstrated by his loss at the end of the film, which is what drives the tragic ending home and incites horror in the audience. The other horror elements of this work lie in the various games, the tragic character ends, and of course, the many dolls coming to life. But this movie is more of a supernatural horror film than a science fiction horror film, some say. Unless we think that the cube, which controlled the whole bizarre event, was alien in nature. What do you think it was? While you ponder that, we have a few more movies to talk about. Up next we have Tetsuo the Iron Man. After a young man inserts scrap metal into his body, post an act of, trigger warning, self-harm, he becomes the victim of a hit and run. Soon the driver also soon sprouts metal, invoking fear and discomfort that will bring to mind Kafka's meteorophobia. Especially since the change to metal causes, trigger warning, the death of his girlfriend during coitus. Especially since the hit and run victim was trying to telepathically control the driver, but eventually the two develop a romantic-like bond and decide to replace the world with metal. Cybermen much, eh? Unlike Doctor Who, though, there is horror here in the form of grotesque deaths and the transformations themselves. The metal men are a staple of science fiction, though, just like in Who, making this movie a must-watch for fans on this list, especially since there is a sequel. Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer. While this is not a direct continuation of the first movie, it had a bigger budget and much of the same themes. A salaryman starts to transform into a machine after his son is, trigger warning, killed by some cultists who are working under orders from his brother, and all of whom want to transform into gods or metal men. Once his wife is also kidnapped, the man transforms completely and realizes that his father had experimented on him and his brother, and, trigger warning, killed their mother in a bizarre coital ritual. As he emerges with his brother and the rest of the cult, he begs his wife to inject him with an injection that will make him rust, but she refuses to harm him, even as the whole group transforms into a tank and goes out into the city. An unmentioned amount of time later, the man, his wife, and his son are shown walking through the ruins of a city. Well, that's it. We've now reached the end of this listicle. And for our last trick, we have quite a treat. Resident Evil, Death Evil. Set in the same universe as the Resident Evil games, this is a biopunk horror adult computer animated action film. Phew, that was a mouthful. Essentially, our heroes head to an island where there is a T-virus outbreak and discover it is all being done by Dylan, a character who was originally deployed in the OG T-virus outbreak. Why is he infecting the world now? Because he had to watch his team die, and that made him feel the world has no justice. How do our heroes fare? Well, they defeat Dylan and escape, but not without help from a little birdie called Rebecca. To know more, catch the movie maybe. Bioweapons and viruses are becoming popular in sci-fi, especially in this franchise. And of course, zombies and madmen make for good horror. What do you think? Well, here we are, at the end of our list, with just one thing left to present. A marvelous review. Japanese sci-fi has a lot of dimensions, even if it tends to love body horror. This has given the world some great pieces of media and brought together fans from many different genres in one room. We personally love stories like Parasite E and Resident Evil for these very reasons. But maybe you have a different favorite. Let us know in the comments maybe. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.